England, 1819. The rain fell softly over the gardens of the Ashford estate that spring afternoon, painting the flowers with a melancholic sheen that seemed to mirror Lady Catherine's state of mind. She stood by her bedroom window, watching the drops slide down the glass like silent tears she herself could no longer shed. Her heart felt hollow, emptied by the sudden departure of the man who had stolen every piece of her soul. The Duke of Heathcliffe had left the region 3 weeks ago without explanation, without proper farewells, leaving only a brief note stating he had urgent matters to resolve at his estate on Wuthering Heights. Catherine had read those words hundreds of times, searching between the lines for some sign that he would return, some veiled promise that their secret meetings in the gardens, their whispered conversations beneath the moonlight, their exchanges of meaningful glances had not been merely the passing whims of a bored nobleman, but there was nothing beyond those cold, formal words, no declaration of love, no request that she wait, no promise of return. The Duke had simply vanished from her life like morning mist burned away by the harsh sun of reality. Catherine pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes as memories flooded her mind unbidden. She remembered the first time she had seen him at the Ashford ball 6 months prior. The grand ballroom had been ablaze with candlelight, the air thick with perfume, and the murmur of aristocratic conversation. Catherine had been standing near the terrace doors, seeking a moment's respite from the stifling heat and the tedious company of various suitors her mother kept pushing in her direction. Then the butler had announced his arrival, and everything had changed. The Duke of Heathcliff had entered with that commanding presence that made every head turn. His dark hair perfectly arranged despite the evening's humidity, his grey eyes surveying the room with an intensity that suggested he was cataloguing every detail, every person, every possibility. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confident grace of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His evening clothes were impeccably tailored, speaking of wealth and taste, but it was something beyond his appearance that caught Catherine's attention. There was an intelligence in his expression, a hint of wildness barely contained beneath the aristocratic polish, something dark and magnetic that intrigued her immediately. When those grey eyes had found hers across the crowded room, Catherine had felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. Something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable, something that made her forget every lesson in propriety she had ever learned. The Duke's gaze had held hers for a long moment, and she had seen surprise flicker across his features, as though he too had felt the unexpected connection. Then someone had spoken to him, breaking the spell, and Catherine had looked away, her heart pounding erratically in her chest. She had not expected him to seek an introduction. Men of his rank typically showed interest only in women of equal or greater status, and while the Ashfords were respectable gentry, they were hardly in the Duke's exalted sphere. Yet within the hour, he had made his way to her side, having secured a proper introduction through her father. The conversation that followed had been innocuous enough on the surface, discussing the usual topics of weather and mutual acquaintances. But beneath the conventional words ran an undercurrent of something far more intense. Their first dance had been a study in restrained passion. When the Duke had extended his hand for a waltz, Catherine had placed hers in his with trembling fingers, acutely aware of the impropriety of feeling such strong attraction to a man she had only just met. As they took their positions and the music began, his hand at her waist had burned through the fabric of her gown, and when he had leaned close to whisper a compliment about her grace, his breath against her ear had sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. They had talked during that dance, and Catherine had discovered that beneath his aristocratic reserve, the Duke possessed a passionate nature that matched her own. He spoke of his isolated estate on Wuthering Heights, a windswept property in the moorlands where storms raged and the landscape reflected the tumultuous feelings he kept carefully hidden from society. He had confessed his love of the wild countryside, the freedom he felt when riding across the moors far from the constraints of civilized company. His eyes had lit with genuine feeling as he described the untamed beauty of his home, and Catherine had found herself captivated by this glimpse of the man beneath the title. When the dance ended, the Duke had been reluctant to release her hand, his fingers lingering on hers for just a moment longer than strictest propriety allowed. Catherine had felt that touch all the way to her core, her body responding to him in ways she had never experienced before. As he bowed and stepped away, she had known with absolute certainty that her life had just changed irrevocably, though she could not yet fathom how profoundly. After that night, the Duke had become a frequent visitor to the Ashford estate. He claimed friendship with Catherine's father, and indeed the two men spent hours in the study discussing matters of politics and land management. Lord Ashford was flattered by the attention of such an important nobleman, never suspecting that his guest's true interest lay not in conversation about crop rotation and parliamentary reform, but in stolen moments with his daughter. Catherine knew the truth. She saw it in the way the Duke's gaze sought hers across the drawing room during afternoon calls, in the way he maneuvered to be near her during walks in the garden, suggesting particular paths that would take them momentarily out of sight of their chaperones. She felt it in the subtle touches that lasted just a moment longer than propriety allowed, his hand steadying her elbow as they navigated garden steps, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her a book he thought she might enjoy. Their connection deepened with each encounter. The Duke would arrive at the Ashford estate with the wind of the moors still clinging to him, bringing with him an energy and intensity that set Catherine's pulse racing. He told her about Wuthering Heights, painting pictures with his words of a wild and beautiful place, where convention held less sway, where one could breathe freely without the suffocating restrictions of society. Catherine found herself longing to see this place he described with such passion, to understand the part of him that came alive in that wind-swept landscape. During one memorable afternoon, they had found themselves alone in the Ashford library, while the rest of the household was occupied with preparations for an upcoming dinner party. The Duke had been examining the family's collection of books, making comments about various titles, when he had pulled down a volume of poetry. He had opened it to a specific page and began reading aloud, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room, verses about love and longing that seemed to speak directly to what existed between them. His eyes had lifted from the page to meet hers, and Catherine had felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. He had continued through the poem, each word seeming to carry double meaning, each phrase a declaration that he could not make openly. When he finished, he had closed the book slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Poetry has a way of expressing what we dare not say in plain speech," he had murmured, moving closer to her. "It gives voice to feelings that society deems too intense, too passionate for polite conversation." "And what feelings would those be, Your Grace?" Catherine had asked, surprised by her own boldness. The Duke had smiled, a slow, sensual curve of his lips that made her pulse quicken. "The kind that keep a man awake at night, Lady Catherine. The kind that make him question every decision he has made, every obligation he has accepted. The kind that make him wish he were free to follow his heart rather than his duty, to claim what he desires rather than accept what has been arranged for him." Before Catherine could respond, they had heard footsteps approaching, and the Duke had stepped back to a respectful distance, replacing the book on the shelf with practiced ease. But the words had hung between them, unfinished and electric, adding to the building tension that characterized every interaction they shared. As weeks turned into months, Catherine had begun to wonder if perhaps the Duke would never act on whatever feelings existed between them. She understood there were complications in his life, obligations that bound him in ways he could not fully explain. Yet she had allowed herself to hope that his feelings for her were strong enough to overcome these obstacles, that eventually he would speak to her father and make their connection formal and recognized. But the proposal never came. Instead, the Duke continued his pattern of visits and meaningful glances, of conversations laden with subtext and touches that promised more than they delivered. Catherine found herself caught in a limbo of anticipation and frustration, certain of his feelings, yet uncertain of his intentions, longing for clarity, yet afraid of what that clarity might reveal. Her mother had begun to notice the Duke's attentions and had grown increasingly concerned. Lady Ashford was a practical woman who understood the ways of society all too well. She knew that a Duke's interest, however flattering, meant nothing without a formal declaration. She had tried to warn Catherine against reading too much into the Duke's behavior, reminding her daughter that men of high rank often engaged in flirtations that meant nothing beyond the moment's amusement. "You must guard your heart, Catherine," her mother had cautioned during one of their private conversations. "The Duke is a charming man, but he has made no formal approach to your father. Until he does, you must not allow yourself to hope for more than friendship. Men of his station have obligations and expectations that often prevent them from following their hearts, even when those hearts are genuinely engaged. Catherine had nodded dutifully, but she could not make herself believe that what she felt, what she sensed flowing between herself and the Duke, was anything as trivial as a passing flirtation. When he looked at her, she saw longing that matched her own. When he spoke to her, she heard the unspoken words beneath the acceptable conversation. When he was near her, she felt the pull of connection so strong it seemed impossible that he did not feel it equally. Then came that last evening in the garden, the night that had filled Catherine with such hope, only to be followed by such crushing disappointment. It had been a warm evening in late April, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and newly bloomed roses. Catherine had been unable to sleep, her mind troubled by the growing realization that the Duke might never act on whatever feelings existed between them, that she might spend her entire life wondering what could have been if only he had possessed the courage to declare himself. She had dressed in a simple gown and slipped from her room, making her way to the gardens through the quiet house. The moon had been nearly full, casting silver shadows across the gravel paths and making the white roses seem to glow with ethereal light. Catherine had walked among the flowers, trying to sort through her tangled emotions, trying to decide whether she should continue to hope or whether she should begin the painful process of letting go of her dreams. She had heard footsteps behind her and turned to find the Duke there, his appearance disheveled in a way she had never seen before. His cravat was loosened, his coat slightly rumpled, and his hair looked as though he had been running his hands through it in agitation. But it was his expression that had made her breath catch. Gone was the careful control he usually maintained, replaced by raw emotion that transformed his aristocratic features into something almost desperate. "Catherine," he had said, and the sound of her name on his lips, without the formal title preceding it, had made her pulse quicken. He had stepped closer, close enough that she could see the conflict warring in his eyes, the battle between duty and desire written plainly across his face. "I should not be here. This is highly improper. If anyone were to discover us alone together at this hour, your reputation would be compromised beyond repair." "Yet here you are," Catherine had whispered, emboldened by the darkness and the desperate need to understand what lay between them. "Why did you come, Your Grace? What drives you to seek me out in the dead of night if not something more than simple friendship?" He had reached out then, his fingers brushing her cheek with such tenderness that tears had sprung to her eyes. His touch had been gentle yet possessive, conveying both reverence and longing in that single gesture. "You have undone me completely," he had confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "From the moment I saw you across that ballroom, I have been lost. Every day I tell myself I must return to Wuthering Heights, must remove myself from this temptation, must stop torturing us both with my presence. Yet I find myself drawn back to you, like a moth to flame, unable to stay away, no matter how much wisdom dictates that I should." Catherine's heart had soared at his words, hope blooming bright and fierce in her chest. "Then don't leave," she had breathed, her hand covering his where it rested against her face. "Stay, speak to my father. Make your intentions known. Whatever obstacles exist, surely we can overcome them together. Love should be enough to conquer any difficulty." But something had shuddered in his expression at her words, pain and frustration replacing the tender longing of moments before. He had stepped back, withdrawing his hand as though burned, and Catherine had felt the chill of his absence like a physical blow. "It is not so simple, Catherine," he had said, his voice tight with restraint. "There are matters, complications you cannot understand. I am bound by an arrangement made long ago, a contract signed when I was barely more than a child. I am engaged to another woman, Catherine. The wedding was arranged by our families, a merger of estates and fortunes that has nothing to do with hearts or feelings." The words had struck Catherine like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. "Engaged? But you never mentioned, you never said anything about another woman. How could you pursue me, make me fall in love with you when you belong to someone else?" "Because I am a selfish fool," he had replied, anguish clear in his voice. "Because from the moment I met you, every promise I had made, Every obligation I had accepted became unbearable. But I cannot simply walk away from my responsibilities, Catherine. There are legal contracts, family expectations, the honor of my name at stake. I must return to Wuthering Heights and find a way to extricate myself from this engagement, to free myself, so that I can come to you as a man with nothing standing between us. Then there is a path forward? Catherine had asked, desperate hope warring with the pain of learning about his engagement. You will return? There is some resolution that will allow us to be together? He had pulled her into his arms then, holding her with a desperation that spoke of deep feeling. I will find a way, Catherine. I swear it on everything I hold sacred. I will go to Wuthering Heights. I will meet with solicitors. I will do whatever it takes to break this engagement and free myself. But I need time. You must trust me and wait. Can you do that? Can you have faith in what exists between us, even when I cannot yet give you the promises you deserve? She had believed him. God help her. She had believed every word, had read promise and commitment in every syllable, had convinced herself that this was merely a temporary separation before their future together could begin. When he had pressed kisses to her temple, whispered words of devotion, promised to return as soon as he was free, she had surrendered to the embrace completely, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of him, the sound of his heartbeat beneath her ear. But that had been 3 weeks ago, and since then nothing but silence. The note he had left had been delivered by his valet the morning after their garden encounter, brief and formal, stating only that he had departed for Wuthering Heights to attend to urgent matters. There had been no personal message, no reassurance, no timeline for his return. Whatever complications he faced at his moorland estate, he had clearly decided they were insurmountable. He had left her with nothing but memories and a broken heart, abandoned her to whatever fate awaited, without his protection or his love. Catherine opened her eyes, pulling herself back from the painful memories to the equally painful present. The rain continued to fall outside her window, and somewhere in the house she could hear her mother's voice calling for the servants, the normal sounds of daily life continuing around her, despite the fact that her own life felt suspended in misery. A knock at her door pulled Catherine from her reverie. Her mother entered without waiting for permission, her expression a mixture of excitement and determination that immediately put Catherine on guard. Lady Ashford was dressed in her finest afternoon gown, her hair perfectly arranged, looking every inch the aristocratic matriarch. There was a brightness in her eyes that Catherine recognized as the look of someone who believed they were about to deliver wonderful news. "Catherine, darling, you must come downstairs immediately," Lady Ashford announced, her hands clasped together in barely contained enthusiasm. "We have the most wonderful news, and your father wishes to share it with you directly. This is a momentous occasion, one that will secure your future and elevate our family's position considerably." Catherine felt a cold dread settle in her stomach at her mother's words. "I am not feeling well, Mother," she replied, turning back to the window in hopes of postponing whatever announcement awaited her. Perhaps later would be more suitable. "I find myself quite fatigued and would prefer to rest." "Nonsense. You have been moping in this room for weeks now, ever since that Duke disappeared to his gloomy estate on Wuthering Heights, without so much as a backward glance," her mother said with characteristic bluntness. "This news will surely lift your spirits and help you understand that there are far more practical considerations in life than romantic fancies and broken promises. Come now. Don't keep your father waiting. This concerns your future, my dear, and it is time you thought of practical matters rather than impossible dreams." The words confirmed Catherine's worst fears about what awaited her downstairs, but she allowed herself to be led from the room and down the grand staircase to her father's study, her feet feeling leaden with each step. Lord Ashford's study was a masculine room dominated by heavy furniture and leather-bound books, smelling of pipe tobacco and old paper. It had always been a sanctuary of sorts, a place where Catherine had spent hours as a child. Now it felt like a trap closing around her. Her father stood by the fireplace, looking pleased with himself in a way that made Catherine's stomach clench with dread. Beside him stood a man Catherine recognized from various social gatherings, Lord Edmund Linton, heir to a substantial fortune and known throughout the county as an eligible bachelor of impeccable standing. He was perhaps 10 years older than Catherine, with fair hair going slightly thin at the temples, regular features that might have been handsome if they held any warmth, and pale blue eyes that assessed her with the cold calculation of someone evaluating property rather than a potential wife. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face as understanding crashed over her like a wave. This was not merely a social call. This was something far more permanent and infinitely more terrible. "Ah, Catherine, there you are," her father said warmly, gesturing her into the room with obvious satisfaction. "Come in, my dear. Lord Linton and I have just concluded some very important business, and it involves you most directly. This is a great day for our family, one that will ensure your security and our continued prosperity." Catherine forced herself to step fully into the room, though every instinct screamed at her to turn and run. "Father, what have you done?" "I have secured your future, my dear," Lord Ashford replied, seeming oblivious to her distress. "Lord Linton has asked for your hand in marriage, and I have gladly accepted on your behalf. The contracts have been signed, the settlements agreed upon, and the wedding will take place 1 month from today. Is this not wonderful news? You will be Lady Linton, mistress of one of the finest estates in the county." The room seemed to spin around Catherine as the full horror of her situation became clear. 1 month. They were giving her 1 month before binding her for life to a man she barely knew, a man she did not love, a man who was not the Duke of Heathcliffe. She looked at Lord Linton, seeing him clearly for the first time, and what she saw made her skin crawl. There was no warmth in his expression, no hint of the passion or connection she had shared with Heathcliff. His gaze was appraising and possessive, the look of a man who had just acquired a valuable asset. "Lord Linton," Catherine managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper, "might I have a word with you privately? There are matters we must discuss before this arrangement can proceed." Her father frowned, but Lord Linton raised a hand. "It is quite all right, Lord Ashford. Your daughter naturally wishes to become better acquainted with her future husband. If you and Lady Ashford would excuse us for a moment, I am happy to address any concerns Lady Catherine might have." Once they were alone, Catherine struggled to find the right words. "My lord, I am honored by your proposal, truly I am. But I must ask you to reconsider this arrangement. My affections are otherwise engaged, and it would be unfair to both of us to enter into a marriage under such circumstances." Lord Linton's expression did not change, remaining coolly pleasant. "I am well aware of your infatuation with the Duke of Heathcliff, Lady Catherine. The entire county has observed his attentions toward you and your obvious receptiveness to them. However, I must point out that the Duke has left for Wuthering Heights without declaring himself, has he not? He has had months to make his intentions known, yet he chose to depart without taking any such action. Clearly, whatever his feelings may have been, they were insufficient to overcome whatever obstacles he faced. The brutal accuracy of his assessment cut Catherine deeply. "That may be true, but my feelings have not changed. I cannot promise to be a good wife to you when my heart belongs to another." "I do not require your heart, Lady Catherine," Lord Linton replied matter-of-factly. "I require your name, your connections, and your ability to manage my household and bear my children. Your feelings are your own affair, provided you conduct yourself with appropriate discretion. I am offering you a secure future, position in society, and the respect that comes with being Lady Linton. What the Duke offered you was nothing but passionate words and broken promises. I think the choice is quite clear." Catherine wanted to argue, to rage against the cold, mercenary nature of his proposal, but what could she say? He was right about Heathcliff. The man she loved had offered her nothing tangible. Whatever his reasons for leaving, the result was the same. He had abandoned her to this fate. "I see," she said quietly, defeat weighing heavily on her shoulders. "And there is no possibility of delaying the wedding?" "Your father and I agreed that a swift wedding would be best for all concerned," Lord Linton said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he knew exactly why speed was necessary. He wanted to bind her to him before Heathcliff could return. "The banns will be read starting this Sunday, and we shall be married 4 weeks hence. I hope you will come to see this arrangement as the blessing it truly is, Lady Catherine." The following weeks passed in a blur of misery and wedding preparations. Catherine moved through her days like a ghost, smiling when required, accepting congratulations from neighbors and friends who seemed oblivious to her pain. Her mother was in her element, planning every detail of the wedding with meticulous care, discussing flowers and menus and guest lists with an enthusiasm Catherine could not begin to share. Lady Ashford had chosen white roses for the church decorations, explaining to anyone who would listen that they symbolized purity and new beginnings. Catherine found the symbolism bitterly ironic. There was nothing pure about a marriage entered into without love. But she said nothing, merely nodded when her mother showed her fabric samples and asked her opinion on the menu. The wedding gown arrived 2 weeks before the ceremony, delivered in an enormous box. When it was lifted from its tissue paper wrappings, even Catherine had to admit it was beautiful. Layers of white silk and delicate lace, tiny pearl buttons running down the back, sleeves that would sit just off the shoulders. It was the sort of gown any bride should be thrilled to wear. But as the maids helped Catherine into the dress, as her mother fussed with the fit and exclaimed over how beautiful she looked, Catherine felt only a deep, aching sadness. This gown should have been worn for her wedding to Heathcliff, should have been the dress in which she pledged her love to the man who held her heart. Instead, it would be the costume she wore while binding herself to a man who wanted her only for practical benefits. "Oh, Catherine, you look absolutely radiant," her mother had said, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Lord Linton is a very fortunate man. You will be the envy of every woman in the county." Catherine had said nothing, staring at her reflection in the mirror and seeing a stranger. The woman looking back at her appeared composed and beautiful, every inch the blushing bride, but her eyes were dead, lifeless, reflecting none of the joy that should accompany such a momentous occasion. At night, alone in her room, Catherine would stand by the window and stare out into the darkness, hoping against hope to see a familiar figure riding up the drive, come to rescue her from this nightmare. She would replay Heathcliff's words from that last night in the garden, trying to convince herself that he had meant them, that he would remember his promise. But the drive remained empty, night after night, and as the days counted down toward her wedding, hope slowly died in her chest. The Duke was not coming. Whatever he had felt for her, it had not been enough. She needed to accept reality and make the best of the life that awaited her as Lady Linton, no matter how much the prospect filled her with dread. The banns were read on 3 successive Sundays, each announcement feeling like another nail in the coffin of Catherine's dreams. She attended church services beside her family, acutely aware of the curious glances from other parishioners, the whispered conversations behind gloved hands. Everyone knew about her association with the Duke, and everyone could see that she was marrying Lord Linton instead. The gossip was delicious, the girl who had reached too high now settling for a mere lord. The cautionary tale of what happened when young women allowed romance to turn their heads. She could hear fragments of conversations as people lingered after services. "Such a shame about the Duke," one woman said, though really, what did she expect? "Dukes don't marry country girls," another voice responded. "At least Lord Linton is offering her respectability. She should count herself fortunate after mooning after Heathcliff, like a lovesick schoolgirl." Catherine held her head high through it all, refusing to show how deeply the words cut. She played the role expected of her, the dutiful daughter accepting her parents' arrangements. Only in the privacy of her room did she allow the mask to slip, did she permit herself to feel the full depth of her despair. Lord Linton visited regularly during the engagement period, always proper and correct, maintaining appropriate distance while making it clear through subtle gestures that he considered Catherine his property already. He spoke of his estates, his plans for expansion, his expectations for their married life. Through all these conversations, Catherine listened with half an ear, her mind always elsewhere, her heart crying out for what she had lost. 1 week before the wedding, Catherine's trousseau was delivered, trunk after trunk of new clothing and linens. Her mother insisted on examining every piece, holding up nightgowns and day dresses for Catherine's approval. Catherine observed the parade of wedding finery with detachment, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. These clothes were for Lady Linton, and while she would bear that name, she could not connect the person she would become with, who she still was inside. The night before her wedding, Catherine could not sleep. She paced her room restlessly, her mind spinning with desperation and the awful finality of what the morning would bring. Tomorrow she would become Lord Linton's wife. Tomorrow she would speak vows that would bind her for life to a man she did not love. Tomorrow her last hopes of happiness with Heathcliff would be extinguished forever. She found herself at the window again, staring out into the night, as she had done so many times over the past month. The moon was full and bright, illuminating the gardens where she and Heathcliff had shared their last conversation. The memory was so vivid, she could almost feel his arms around her, almost hear his voice promising to find a way back to her. "I will find a way, Catherine. I swear it." But he had not found a way, or perhaps he had not truly tried. Perhaps Lord Linton was right, and she had been nothing but a pleasant diversion, a country miss who had mistaken sophisticated flirtation for genuine feeling. Perhaps his departure had been relief rather than regret, an escape from entanglement with a woman unsuitable for his station. Catherine pressed her forehead against the cool glass, tears finally falling after weeks of holding them back. Tomorrow she would marry Lord Linton. Tomorrow she would begin her new life, and she would do her best to bury the memory of grey eyes and whispered promises, of moonlit gardens and the feeling of being truly, deeply loved. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sort of perfect spring day that seemed to mock Catherine's inner turmoil. Sunshine streamed through her window, birds sang cheerfully in the garden, and the entire estate buzzed with activity as final preparations were made. Her mother and the maids descended upon her room early, chattering excitedly as they helped her bathe and dress, arranging her hair in an elaborate style that left her feeling like a stranger in her own skin. The wedding gown fit perfectly, its weight seeming to press down on her shoulders like a physical burden. As the maids fastened the tiny pearl buttons and arranged her veil, Catherine stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman in the mirror. She appeared composed and beautiful, every inch the blushing bride, but inside her heart was breaking. "Oh, Catherine, you look absolutely radiant," her mother exclaimed, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Lord Linton is a very fortunate man indeed." Catherine said nothing, unable to trust her voice. She simply nodded, allowing herself to be led downstairs where her father waited, looking proud and satisfied with the match he had arranged. The carriage ride to the church was mercifully brief, though every moment felt like an eternity. Catherine sat beside her father, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind strangely blank as though her consciousness had retreated to some safe place where it could not be touched by what was happening. Her father patted her hand and said something about her making him proud, but the words seemed to reach her through water, distorted and meaningless. All too soon they arrived at the church, and Catherine could see through the carriage window that it was packed with guests, all of society having turned out to witness the wedding. As she stepped from the carriage, Catherine took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The church bells rang overhead, their joyful pealing a cruel counterpoint to the emptiness in her heart. Her father offered his arm and she took it, allowing him to lead her toward the church entrance where her future awaited. The doors opened, and Catherine could see the long aisle stretching before her, lined with pews filled with curious faces. At the far end, Lord Linton waited beside the vicar, looking smugly satisfied in his wedding finery. The organ began to play, the traditional wedding march that should have filled Catherine with joy, but instead felt like a funeral dirge. She began the slow walk down the aisle on her father's arm, aware of every eye upon her, of the whispers that followed in her wake. She could feel the weight of society's expectations, the pressure of duty and family obligation, all pushing her forward toward a future she did not want. At the altar, Lord Linton waited, his cold eyes assessing her as though she were a prize he had won. As her father released her arm and stepped back, Catherine moved to stand beside Lord Linton. He took her hand in his grip firm and possessive, making her skin crawl. The vicar stood ready with his prayer book, preparing to bind them together for eternity. Catherine felt numb, disconnected from her body, as though she were watching events unfold from a great distance. The vicar began the ceremony, his words washing over Catherine in meaningless waves. She heard herself making the proper responses automatically, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. This was really happening. In moments she would be Lady Linton, bound to this man forever. Heathcliff had not come. Her last desperate hope had been extinguished. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, the vicar intoned. his voice echoing through the packed church. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. It is a covenant not to be broken, a sacred bond that unites two souls for all their days upon this earth. Catherine felt the walls closing in around her, the air becoming thick and difficult to breathe. This was her reality now. This was the future that awaited her. She would speak vows to Lord Linton, would bind herself to him for life, would spend her days going through the motions of being his wife, while her heart remained forever with a man who had abandoned her. Marriage should not be undertaken carelessly or selfishly, but thoughtfully and with reverence for the commitment being made. The vicar continued, his words seeming to mock Catherine's situation. There was nothing thoughtful about this marriage, nothing reverent about speaking vows without love. It was a transaction, a business arrangement dressed up in the trappings of sacred ceremony. The vicar looked out over the assembled guests, his expressions solemn as he prepared to continue with the traditional words. If anyone present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever. Hold your peace. The traditional pause followed, that moment of ceremonial silence before the ceremony would continue. Catherine had heard these words at other weddings, had watched as the brief pause passed without incident before the vows were exchanged. It was merely a formality, a ritual observation that no one ever actually responded to. She closed her eyes, trying to gather the strength to speak the vows that would seal her fate, trying to resign herself to the life that stretched before her. In that moment, the church doors burst open with a tremendous crash that echoed through the sacred space like thunder. The sound was so sudden, so violent, that several guests cried out in alarm. Every head turned as one toward the disturbance, gasps and exclamations filling the air. Catherine's heart stopped in her chest, her eyes flying open as hope and terror warred within her. Silhouetted in the doorway, breathing hard as though he had run the entire way, stood the Duke of Heathcliffe. He looked wild, untamed, like the moorland storms he had described to her. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his dark hair windblown and falling across his forehead, his coat dusty from hard riding. There was mud splattered on his boots and breeches, suggesting he had ridden through difficult terrain without stopping. But it was his eyes that held Catherine transfixed, those grey eyes that blazed with an intensity that made her knees weak, that spoke of desperation and determination, and a love so fierce it took her breath away. Those eyes found hers across the crowded church, and in them Catherine saw everything she had feared she would never see again. Longing, devotion, an apology for the pain he had caused. And underneath it all, a fierce possessive claim that said she belonged to him and him alone, that no ceremony on earth could change that fundamental truth. "I object," the Duke declared, his voice ringing through the stunned silence with absolute authority. "I object with every fiber of my being to this travesty of a marriage." Chaos erupted instantly. Gasps and exclamations filled the church as every guest began talking at once, voices rising in shock and excitement and scandalized delight. This was unprecedented, unheard of, the sort of dramatic scene that would be talked about for years to come. Lord Linton's hand tightened painfully on Catherine's, his face flushing an alarming shade of purple as fury overtook his usual cold composure. Her father stood abruptly from his pew, demanding to know the meaning of this outrageous interruption. Her mother looked as though she might faint, clutching at the arm of a concerned neighbor. But Catherine heard none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the man striding down the aisle toward her, his eyes never leaving hers, his expression a mixture of determination and desperate hope. Each step he took seemed to resonate through her body, her heart beginning to beat again after weeks of feeling dead inside. He had come. Against all odds, despite everything, Heathcliff had come for her. "You have no right to interrupt these proceedings, Your Grace," the vicar protested, his face pale with shock but his voice attempting to maintain ecclesiastical authority. "This wedding has been properly arranged and announced. The banns have been read on 3 successive Sundays. The contracts have been signed. You cannot simply burst in here and disrupt a sacred ceremony." "I have every right," Heathcliff replied, never breaking stride until he stood directly before Catherine and Lord Linton, so close that Catherine could see the wild beating of his pulse in his throat, could smell the scent of wind and moor that clung to him. Because this woman belongs with me, because I have loved her from the moment I first saw her, and every moment since has only deepened that love. Because I have spent the last month in hell, fighting to free myself from obligations I never wanted, so that I could return to her a whole man, capable of offering her everything she deserves. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The numbness that had possessed her since she entered the church was gone, replaced by overwhelming emotion. Joy. Relief. A desperate hope that this was real, that he truly had come back for her. "You left," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of all the pain she had carried. "You left me without explanation, without promise. You went to Wuthering Heights, and I heard nothing. I thought you did not want me, that you had chosen your obligations over what we shared." The pain that flashed across Heathcliffe's face was almost unbearable to witness. He reached out as though to touch her, then seemed to remember where they were, that she was standing beside another man in a church full of witnesses. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling with the effort of restraining himself. "Not want you. Catherine, wanting you has consumed me, destroyed me, remade me completely. Every moment away from you has been torture beyond description. When I left for Wuthering Heights, it was because I could not bear to pursue you while bound to another woman. It would have been dishonorable, would have compromised you beyond repair." He turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying throughout the church, with the natural authority of his rank and the passion of his conviction. "When I left here a month ago, I was engaged to another woman. It was an arrangement made when I was barely more than a child, a contract signed by families seeking to merge estates and fortunes. It had nothing to do with hearts or feelings, nothing to do with the kind of love that makes life worth living. But it was a legal obligation nonetheless, one I could not simply walk away from without consequences." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves. Catherine's mother had indeed fainted now, slumping against a neighbor who frantically waved smelling salts under her nose. Her father looked thunderous, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Lord Linton was trembling with barely suppressed rage beside her. But Catherine could only stare at Heathcliff, drinking in every word, her heart soaring with each revelation. "I told myself I could not pursue Catherine while bound to another," Heathcliff continued, his voice raw with emotion. "I told myself it would be dishonorable, that I must resolve my prior commitments before offering myself to her. So I returned to Wuthering Heights, and I fought with everything I had to break that engagement. I met with solicitors day and night, negotiated settlements, did everything in my power to free myself from a contract I never wanted in the first place." He paused, his jaw clenching, as though the memory still pained him. "The family refused to release me easily. They demanded compensation for the breach of agreement, for the embarrassment of a broken engagement, for the loss of the alliance they had planned. It took every penny I had, every asset I could liquidate, every favor I could call in. I sold properties, borrowed against my estates, mortgaged Wuthering Heights itself to raise the funds they demanded. I bankrupted myself to be free for her." Gasps echoed through the church. To hear a duke admit to financial ruin was shocking enough, but to admit it so openly, to confess such vulnerability before a crowd of witnesses, was almost unprecedented. Catherine felt fresh tears streaming down her face as she realized the full extent of what he had sacrificed, what he had endured in the month they had been apart. "I received word that the final documents had been signed only yesterday morning," Heathcliff continued, his eyes returning to Catherine's face, holding her gaze with an intensity that made everything else fade away. "The engagement was dissolved, the settlements paid, my obligations fulfilled at last. I was finally free. Free to love you, free to claim you, free to offer you my name and my life without shame or dishonor. I did not even take time to change my clothes or rest. I saddled my horse and rode through the night from Wuthering Heights, nearly killing the poor beast in my desperation to reach you before it was too late." He took a step closer, and Catherine could see the exhaustion in his face now, the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the lines of strain that had not been there a month ago. But beneath the exhaustion burned a fire that nothing could extinguish, a determination that would not be denied. "I knew I might be too late," he said, his voice dropping lower, becoming more intimate despite the crowd of witnesses. "I knew your father might have arranged another match, that you might have given up on me after my unexplained departure. I rode through the night with my heart in my throat, terrified that I would arrive to find you already married, already lost to me forever. But I could not let you marry another man, without at least telling you the truth, without letting you know that I love you more than my own life, more than my title, more than my estates or my position in society. That I would give up everything, surrender my very name if it meant being with you." "This is preposterous," Lord Linton exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. "The contracts are signed, the bans have been read, the settlements have been agreed upon, this wedding will proceed, and you, sir, will be escorted from this church immediately. Guards, someone remove this madman." But no one moved. The guests were too transfixed by the drama unfolding before them, too captivated by the raw emotion on display. Even the church wardens stood frozen, unwilling to lay hands on a duke, uncertain of their authority in such an unprecedented situation. The vicar looked helplessly from Lord Linton to the Duke and back again, clearly out of his depth and unsure how to proceed. Heathcliff ignored Lord Linton completely, his attention focused entirely on Catherine. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them until he stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest as he struggled to control his breathing after his desperate ride. "Catherine," he said, and hearing her name spoken with such tenderness, such desperate longing, nearly undid her completely. "I know I have no right to ask this of you after what I have put you through. I know you have every reason to hate me, to choose the security and certainty that Lord Linton offers over the uncertainty I represent." He gestured to himself with a bitter, self-deprecating smile. "I am practically penniless now, my estates heavily mortgaged to pay for my freedom. Wuthering Heights itself stands on the brink of ruin, saved from complete bankruptcy only by the barest margin. All I can offer you is my name, my title, and a love that will never diminish or fade. I can offer you a life of struggle and hardship as we work to rebuild what I have sacrificed. I can offer you scandal and gossip, for society will never forget that you jilted one man at the altar to run away with another." His voice grew more intense, more desperate, as he continued. "But Catherine, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, if any part of you still loves me as I love you, then I am begging you to choose me. Choose us. Choose love over duty, passion over practicality, a life of meaning over a life of mere comfort. I promise you this, on everything I hold sacred, I will spend every day of my life making you happy. I will work until my hands bleed to restore my fortunes and give you the life you deserve. I will love you with every breath I take, every beat of my heart until the day I die and beyond." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her free hand in both of his. His hands were trembling, she realized. This powerful man who commanded respect wherever he went was literally shaking with the force of his emotion. "Please, Catherine," he whispered, and the raw vulnerability in his voice broke something open inside her. "Please don't marry him. Please don't condemn us both to a lifetime of regret and wondering what might have been. Marry me instead. Come away with me to Wuthering Heights. Let us build a life together, a life filled with the kind of love that poets write about, the kind of passion that makes every struggle worthwhile." Catherine looked into his eyes and saw everything she had dreamed of during those long, miserable weeks of separation. She saw love, true and deep and unwavering. She saw commitment, the kind that had driven him to sacrifice everything he owned for the chance to win her hand. She saw her future, not the empty shell of existence that awaited her as Lady Linton, but a life of meaning and purpose and overwhelming love. Then she looked at Lord Linton, at the man she was supposed to marry in the next few minutes. She saw the cold fury in his eyes, the possessive grip on her hand that spoke of ownership rather than affection. She thought of the life that awaited her as his wife, comfortable and secure but loveless, an existence of going through the motions while her heart remained forever elsewhere. She thought of growing old beside a man she did not love, bearing his children without passion, managing his household without joy, all the while wondering what her life could have been if only she had possessed the courage to choose differently. The choice was no choice at all. "No," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger with each word as certainty filled her. She pulled her hand from Lord Linton's grip with such force that he stumbled backward slightly, his face contorting with shock and rage. "I cannot marry you, Lord Linton. My heart belongs to another, and it would be wrong, it would be a sin against everything sacred. To speak vows I cannot keep with my whole being. This wedding is ended. I will not be your wife." The church erupted once more, voices rising in a cacophony of shock and excitement and scandalized delight. Lord Linton was shouting about broken contracts and damaged reputations, his carefully cultivated dignity completely shattered. Catherine's father was demanding explanations and threatening legal action, his voice booming over the general chaos. Her mother had fainted again, or perhaps had never fully recovered from the first swoon. The guests were in an uproar, some expressing outrage at the spectacle, others clearly thrilled by the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. But Catherine heard none of it. She stepped away from Lord Linton toward Heathcliff, closing the small distance between them, and suddenly she was in his arms, enfolded in his embrace as though she had finally come home after a long and difficult journey. His arms came around her fiercely, possessively, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she did not care. She wrapped her own arms around him, pressing close, feeling his heart thundering against her chest, his breath hot against her hair, as he whispered her name over and over, like a prayer of thanksgiving. "Are you certain?" he asked, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "Your family will be furious. Society will be scandalized. You will be the subject of gossip for months, possibly years. They will say terrible things about you, about us. Are you truly certain this is what you want?" Catherine laughed through her tears, pressing her palm to his cheek, feeling the rough stubble there that spoke of his frantic ride, his desperation to reach her in time. "I have been miserable without you. I have spent a month feeling as though I were dying by inches, going through the motions of living while my soul cried out for you. I do not care what society thinks or what gossip they spread. All I care about is being with you, loving you, building a life together. Yes, I am certain I choose you, I will always choose you, in this life and whatever comes after." The vicar, looking as though he might faint himself, cleared his throat nervously. The poor man was clearly torn between his duty to complete the ceremony he had been hired to perform and his reluctance to antagonize a duke. "Your Grace, Lady Catherine, this is most irregular. The young lady is standing in her wedding gown, having just refused to marry her intended groom. The contracts are signed, the settlements agreed upon. There will be legal ramifications, financial penalties for breach of contract. Perhaps it would be prudent to wait, to allow time for proper arrangements to be made, for solicitors to sort out the legal complications." But Heathcliff shook his head, a smile breaking across his face for the first time since his dramatic entrance, transforming his features from desperate to almost boyishly happy. "Absolutely not. I have waited long enough. I have spent a month in agony, fearing I had lost her forever, nearly destroying myself in the process of winning my freedom. I will not waste another moment, will not risk losing her again through delay or legal complications, or the interference of those who believe they know better than we do what is right for our lives." He looked at Catherine, his eyes questioning despite the smile. "Unless you wish to wait, Catherine, if you will have me, if you will consent to be my wife, I would marry you right here, right now. I would speak my vows before God and all these witnesses this very day, binding you to me so completely that nothing and no one can ever separate us again. Will you marry me, Catherine? Will you become my duchess, my wife, my partner in all things?" Catherine felt joy bubble up inside her, bright and effervescent, washing away the misery of the past month as though it had never been. "Yes," she breathed, her voice full of all the love she had been forced to suppress for so long. "Yes, marry me now. I want nothing more than to become your wife, to bind my life to yours, to stand beside you through whatever challenges may come." The vicar looked absolutely scandalized, his face cycling through various shades of red and purple as he struggled with the situation. "But your grace, Lady Catherine, there are procedures, legalities to consider. Lord Linton's claims of breach of contract alone could tie this matter up in courts for years, and the bans have been read for the wrong couple. I cannot simply marry you without proper preparation and announcement." "Can be addressed by my solicitors," Heathcliff interrupted firmly, reaching into his coat pocket and producing a folded document sealed with official wax. "I have a special license here, obtained from the Archbishop himself before I left London. I acquired it in the desperate hope that I might still convince Catherine to marry me, that I might arrive before she was irrevocably bound to another. This license authorizes me to marry without the reading of bans, at any time and in any place. Every legal requirement has been met. All that remains is for the lady to consent, which she has done most emphatically." He fixed the vicar with a look that brooked no further argument, the full weight of his ducal authority evident in his bearing despite his disheveled appearance. "Unless you would deny us the sacrament of marriage, vicar, unless you would turn us away from God's house when we come seeking his blessing on our union, I suggest we proceed immediately. Or I can simply carry Catherine away from here this moment and find another clergyman more willing to perform his duty." The vicar looked helplessly at Lord Ashford, seeking some guidance or authority to lean on. But Catherine's father was too stunned by the turn of events to offer coherent objection. He stood with his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, unable to find words adequate to the situation. The assembled guests were in an uproar, some expressing outrage at the spectacle, others clearly thrilled by the unprecedented drama. Lord Linton had stormed partway down the aisle, his groomsmen gathering around him uncertainly, clearly torn between supporting their friend and acknowledging that antagonizing a duke was rarely wise. Catherine turned to her parents, knowing she owed them at least an acknowledgement of what this moment meant, of the scandal it would create and the social difficulties that would follow. "Mother, father," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them, one hand still held firmly in Heathcliff's grip, as though afraid he might vanish if she released him. "I know this is not what you planned. I know you arranged the match with Lord Linton, believing it was in my best interests, that it would provide security and status. But I love the Duke of Heathcliff with all my heart. I have loved him from the moment I met him, and that love has only grown stronger through our separation. I cannot imagine my life without him. I will not live a lie, married to one man while loving another. I hope that someday you will understand and forgive me for the scandal this will cause our family." Her mother, recovered from her latest faint and propped up by concerned friends, merely shook her head in bewildered resignation. She looked as though she wanted to object, to forbid this madness, but something in Catherine's expression, some fierce determination, seemed to convince her of the futility. Her father looked as though he wanted to drag Catherine from the church by force, to somehow undo what had happened and restore order to the carefully planned ceremony. But he too seemed to recognize that his daughter was lost to him in this moment, that she had made her choice, and nothing he could say or do would change her mind. Heathcliff produced the special license from his coat pocket with a flourish, handing it to the vicar with a look that dared the man to find any fault with it. The elderly clergyman examined the document with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the official seals and signatures, searching desperately for some reason to refuse, but finding none. It was properly executed, bearing the Archbishop's own seal, granting the Duke of Heathcliff permission to marry without the traditional reading of bans. With a deep sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, the vicar returned to his place at the altar, resignation written in every line of his body. "Very well," he announced in a shaking voice that barely carried over the continued murmuring of the scandalized guests. "If there are no further objections, and may God help us all, we shall proceed with a different wedding than the one originally planned. Will the Duke of Heathcliff and Lady Catherine Ashford please take their places before me?" Catherine felt as though she were floating as she moved to stand beside Heathcliff at the altar, still in the wedding gown that had been chosen for her marriage to Lord Linton, but now repurposed for a ceremony that would bind her to the man she truly loved. This time, it was different. This time, The hand that took hers did so with love rather than possession. This time, when she looked at the man beside her, she saw her future, her partner, the other half of her soul. Lord Linton had finally stormed from the church, his departure marked by the slam of the heavy wooden doors and the shocked exclamations of guests who scurried out of his way. His groomsmen followed uncertainly, casting backward glances at the unprecedented scene unfolding at the altar. Good riddance, Catherine thought with a fierce satisfaction. Let him nurse his wounded pride elsewhere. She was exactly where she belonged, beside the man who had loved her enough to sacrifice everything. The vicar began the ceremony again, his voice still uncertain, but growing steadier as he progressed through the familiar words, perhaps finding comfort in the ritual, even as the circumstances remained wildly irregular. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today for the second time this morning, and under most unusual circumstances, to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Catherine barely heard the opening passages. She was lost in Heathcliffe's eyes, seeing in them everything she had dreamed of and more. Love, devotion, relief, joy, desire, a promise of forever that needed no words to express. His hand held hers with gentle strength, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. She had never felt more alive, more certain, more right than she did in this moment. When the moment came for Heathcliff to recite his vows, his voice rang clear and strong throughout the church, carrying to every corner, ensuring that every witness heard the depth of his commitment. I, Alexander Heathcliff, Duke of Heathcliffe and Master of Wuthering Heights, take thee, Catherine Margaret Ashford, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I plight thee my troth. Then it was Catherine's turn, and she spoke her vows with equal conviction, pouring every ounce of love and commitment into the words, her voice steady and clear despite the tears streaming down her face. I, Catherine Margaret Ashford, take thee, Alexander Heathcliff, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and to obey, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I give thee my troth. Heathcliff produced 2 simple golden bands from his pocket, hastily acquired during his frantic preparations in London, but precious beyond measure to Catherine. He slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, his eyes never leaving hers, as he performed this most intimate of gestures. The metal was warm from being carried against his heart, and Catherine felt the weight of it as a promise, a tangible symbol of the vows they were speaking. She took the other ring and placed it on his finger with equal reverence, completing the circle of their commitment. In that moment, as the gold bands caught the light streaming through the church windows, Catherine felt as though time itself had stopped, as though the entire universe had contracted to contain only the 2 of them and the love they shared. Those whom God has joined together, let no man put asunder, the vicar proclaimed, his voice now carrying a note of satisfaction as he neared the end of the ceremony without further disaster. By the power vested in me by the church and by this special license, I now pronounce you man and wife. Your grace, you may kiss your bride. Heathcliff needed no further encouragement. He pulled Catherine into his arms with a passion that made several elderly ladies gasp in shock, and the younger ones sigh with romantic envy. He kissed her as though he were a man dying of thirst, and she was water, as though he were claiming her and pledging himself to her all at once. Catherine melted into the embrace, finally allowing herself to believe that this was real, that he was truly hers and she was truly his, that nothing would ever separate them again. The kiss went on longer than was strictly proper, but neither of them cared. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and flushed, the church was filled with scattered applause from those guests who had embraced the romantic drama of the moment, mixed with continued murmuring from those who were still scandalized by the unprecedented turn of events. As they turned to face the assembled witnesses, now husband and wife, Catherine caught glimpses of various reactions from the crowd. Some faces showed disapproval, others delight, and still others simply shocked disbelief that such a thing could happen in their respectable community. But Catherine cared for none of it. She was married to the man she loved, the man who had fought for her, who had sacrificed everything to win her hand. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They walked down the aisle together, Catherine's hand firmly clasped in Heathcliffe's, her wedding dress trailing behind her in a whisper of silk and lace. The guests parted before them like waves before the prow of a ship, creating a path toward the church doors and the freedom that lay beyond. Catherine could hear whispers following in their wake, could feel the weight of shocked stares and scandalized glances, but none of it touched her. She was floating on a cloud of pure joy, anchored only by Heathcliffe's strong hand holding hers. Outside the church, Heathcliffe's horse stood pawing the ground, still saddled from his frantic ride, foam dried on its flanks, testament to the desperate pace he had maintained. The poor beast looked exhausted, but stood ready nonetheless. Heathcliff helped Catherine mount, despite the awkward bulk of her wedding gown, the white silk bunching around her legs in a manner that would have horrified her mother under normal circumstances. Then he swung up behind her, settling her securely in front of him, his arms coming around to grasp the reins and encircle her waist simultaneously. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked, laughing with pure joy as she leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady against her spine. "To Wuthering Heights," Heathcliff replied, pressing a kiss to her neck that made her shiver with delight and anticipation. "I want to take you home, Catherine. I want to show you the place that has haunted my dreams almost as much as you have. I want to begin our life together without delay, away from the scandal and gossip, in a place where it is just us and the love we share. I want to wake tomorrow morning with you beside me in my own bed, in our own home, with the wind from the moors singing through the windows and the entire future stretching before us." They rode away from the chaos they had left behind, Catherine held securely in her husband's arms, her wedding dress streaming behind them like a banner. She should have felt anxious about the future, worried about the financial difficulties Heathcliff had mentioned, concerned about the scandal they had created. But all she felt was an overwhelming sense of rightness, of finally being exactly where she belonged. They rode through the countryside as the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, leaving the cultivated fields and gentle landscapes of her childhood home behind. The terrain gradually changed, becoming wilder, more rugged, as they approached the moorlands that housed Wuthering Heights. Catherine watched in fascination as rolling hills gave way to windswept heaths, as neat hedgerows disappeared in favor of ancient stone walls, as the whole character of the land shifted from tame to untamed. "It is beautiful," she breathed, taking in the stark grandeur of the moors, the wild beauty that Heathcliff had described to her during their conversations. "I can see why you love it here, why you always seemed restless in the gentler landscapes near my father's estate." "This is where I belong," Heathcliff said, his voice carrying a note of deep satisfaction. "This is where we belong now, you and I. The moors are harsh but honest, Catherine. There is no pretense here, no artificial civility covering base motives. The wind howls when it wishes, the storms rage without apology, and life exists in its truest form. After the suffocation of society and its endless rules, this place feels like freedom." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they crested a final hill, and Catherine got her first glimpse of Wuthering Heights. The house stood proud and solitary, against the dramatic landscape, a solid stone manor that looked as though it had grown from the very earth itself. It was smaller than the grand ducal estates she had heard described, more austere in its architecture, but there was something compelling about its windswept isolation, its stark beauty that matched the wild landscape surrounding it. "Welcome home, Duchess," Heathcliff murmured in her ear as they approached the house, and Catherine felt a thrill run through her at the title, at the realization that she was truly his wife now, that this wild and beautiful place was now her home as well. The staff, though surprised by the sudden arrival of a bride in full wedding regalia, welcomed Catherine warmly. They were clearly devoted to their master, and seeing his joy at having her there seemed to be recommendation enough. A housekeeper came forward, curtsying deeply, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile, as Heathcliff introduced Catherine as his Duchess. "We've been hearing about you, Your Grace," the woman said kindly. "His Grace has spoken of little else these past weeks. He's been like a man possessed, working day and night to settle his affairs so he could return to you. We're honoured to have you here at Wuthering Heights." Heathcliff carried Catherine over the threshold himself, despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. "Tradition," he insisted, his eyes sparkling with happiness as he set her down carefully in the entrance hall. "We may have scandalized society with our wedding, but I'll be damned if I don't carry my bride over the threshold of her new home." That night, in the master bedroom that overlooked the wild beauty of the moors, Heathcliff held Catherine close and finally told her the full story of his month-long absence. He spoke of the difficult negotiations with his former fiancée's family, of the legal battles and financial maneuvering that had consumed his every waking moment. He described nights spent pacing the halls of Wuthering Heights, torn between the need to resolve his obligations honorably and the desperate fear that he would lose Catherine in the process. "I knew I should have explained everything before I left," he said, his fingers gently stroking her hair as they lay together in the darkness, the sound of wind whistling around the eaves of the house providing a wild symphony. "But I was ashamed, Catherine. I was ashamed that I had allowed myself to court you, to encourage your feelings, while still bound to another. I thought it would be more honorable to resolve the situation first, and then come to you with a clear conscience, able to offer you everything without reservation or complication." "We both made mistakes," Catherine replied softly, tracing patterns on his chest, marveling at the reality of being here with him, of having the right to touch him like this. "I should have been more patient, should have trusted in what we had shared rather than assuming the worst when you left. And perhaps my father would not have been so quick to accept Lord Linton's proposal if I had been more forthcoming about my feelings for you, though knowing him, he probably would have arranged something anyway." "Linton knew about us," Heathcliff said darkly, his arm tightening around her. "He knew about our connection, and he deliberately moved quickly to secure you before I could return. That calculating proposal, that hasty wedding date, it was all designed to trap you before I had a chance to free myself and claim you properly. If I had been even one day later, if my horse had thrown a shoe or I had been delayed by weather, you would be his wife now instead of mine." "But you were not late," Catherine reminded him, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw, feeling the scratch of stubble against her lips. "You arrived in time. You spoke up, you fought for us, and now here we are, husband and wife, just as we were meant to be. Nothing else matters." In the days and weeks that followed, Catherine discovered that married life with Heathcliff was everything she had dreamed it would be, and infinitely more. The financial constraints he had warned her about were indeed real, but far from unbearable. Wuthering Heights was productive enough to support them comfortably, if not lavishly, and Catherine found she had no interest in the elaborate balls and social whirl she had once enjoyed. She was content with quiet evenings spent reading together by the fire, long walks across the windswept moors, where Heathcliff taught her to love the wild landscape as he did, and the simple joy of waking each morning in her husband's arms. The scandal they had created did indeed become the talk of society for months. Letters arrived from various acquaintances, some expressing outrage at Catherine's behavior, others secretly thrilled by the romantic drama of it all. Catherine's mother wrote frequently at first, alternating between reproachful lectures about duty and family honour, and grudging admissions that the Duke was indeed a more prestigious match than Lord Linton had been. Her father remained silent for several weeks, before finally sending a brief note acknowledging the marriage and wishing them well, though his disappointment was evident in every stiffly formal word. Lord Linton, as expected, had threatened legal action over the breach of contract, demanding compensation for his humiliation and the expenses he had incurred for the wedding. Heathcliff's solicitors handled the matter with efficiency, and eventually a settlement was reached that satisfied Linton's pride, if not his wounded ego. Catherine heard through society gossip that he had married an heiress within 6 months, proving that his interest in her had been as mercenary as she had suspected. The news brought her no satisfaction, only relief that she had escaped such a fate. But none of the external drama touched the happiness that Catherine and Heathcliff built together within the walls of Wuthering Heights. They spent their days learning each other, discovering the small details and habits that came with sharing a life. Catherine learned that her husband was an early riser, who loved to watch the sunrise from the East Tower, that he had a passion for poetry that rivaled her own, that beneath his often stern exterior he possessed a surprisingly tender heart. Heathcliff discovered that Catherine had an unexpected talent for estate management that proved invaluable, given their reduced circumstances, that she sang beautifully when she thought no one was listening, that she could make him laugh with her sharp observations about the absurdities of the society they had scandalized. They established rituals and traditions that became the foundation of their marriage. Every evening before dinner, they would walk together across the moors regardless of weather, Catherine learning to navigate the rough terrain, while Heathcliff pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his childhood explorations of this wild landscape. Every Sunday they would ride out to survey the estate together, Catherine learning about tenant management and agricultural practices, while Heathcliff valued her input and ideas in ways that made her feel like a true partner rather than mere decoration. And every night, they would retire to their bedroom where passion and tenderness intertwined, where physical intimacy deepened the emotional bond between them until Catherine could not imagine where she ended and he began. 3 months into their marriage, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. She was in the morning room working on correspondence when the housekeeper announced that Lady Ashford had arrived. Catherine's heart leapt with a mixture of joy and trepidation as her mother swept into the room, looking around with the critical eye of someone expecting to find evidence of poverty and hardship. "Mother," Catherine greeted her, rising to offer an embrace that was somewhat stiffly returned. "This is an unexpected pleasure. I did not know you were planning to visit." "I was in the area," her mother replied vaguely, though Catherine suspected she had made the journey specifically to check on her wayward daughter. "I thought it was time I saw how you were managing in your reduced circumstances. Your father and I have been quite concerned about your welfare." Catherine bit back a smile at her mother's tone, which suggested she expected to find her daughter living in squalor. "As you can see, we are quite comfortable. The house may be smaller than the grand ducal estates you might have expected, but it suits us perfectly. Heathcliff and I have built something here that is far more valuable than any amount of luxury." Lady Ashford sipped the tea Catherine poured for her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the tastefully decorated room. The furnishings were indeed simpler than what graced the Ashford estate, but everything spoke of quality and care. "I suppose it is adequate," she admitted grudgingly. "And the Duke, how does he occupy himself, having given up so much of his fortune?" "He manages this estate with great care and attention," Catherine replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "He has implemented several innovative farming techniques that are already showing remarkable results. The tenants speak highly of him, and productivity has increased significantly since he began his reforms. And he has begun writing as well, actually. He is working on a treatise about agricultural management and the moral obligations of landowners to those who work their lands. Several publishers have already expressed interest." Her mother's eyebrows rose slightly. "A duke who works? How very unusual. And you, Catherine? Do you not find yourself bored here, isolated from society and all the entertainments you once enjoyed?" "I find myself happier than I have ever been," Catherine said simply. "Mother, I know you and father were disappointed by how things transpired. I know the scandal was difficult for you, and I am sorry for the embarrassment it caused. But I need you to understand that I am happy, truly, deeply happy, in a way I never could have been as Lady Linton. Heathcliff is not just my husband, but my partner, my closest friend, the other half of my soul. What we have together is worth more than all the social approval in the world." Lady Ashford set down her teacup, her expression softening slightly as she studied her daughter's face. "I can see that, Catherine. Much as it pains me to admit it, I can see that you are happy. When I received your letters these past months, I could hear joy in every word, something that was notably absent during your engagement to Lord Linton." She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words, pride and maternal concern warring in her expression. "Your father and I, we wanted security for you. We wanted to know you would be well provided for, protected from the uncertainties of life. We thought we were doing what was best, arranging a match that would ensure your comfort and status." "I know you did," Catherine said softly, reaching out to take her mother's hand, "and I am grateful for your concern, truly. But security without love is a prison, no matter how gilded the bars. Heathcliff has given me something far more valuable than wealth or position. He has given me partnership, respect, and a love that makes every day an adventure. I wake each morning grateful for the life we are building together. Heathcliff chose that moment to enter the room, stopping short when he saw Lady Ashford. To his credit, he recovered quickly, bowing with perfect courtesy despite his informal country attire, slightly dusty from his morning work on the estate. "Lady Ashford, what a pleasant surprise. I hope you will forgive me for not being present to greet you properly. I was out inspecting the North Fields, where we have been implementing new drainage systems." Catherine watched as her mother assessed her son-in-law, taking in his informal dress, the slight dishevelment that came from actual physical work, the easy confidence with which he moved. She saw the moment her mother's reservations crumbled, replaced by reluctant approval. Here was a man who clearly loved her daughter, who worked alongside his tenants rather than simply giving orders from a distance, who possessed both strength and gentleness in equal measure. "Your Grace," Lady Ashford replied, inclining her head. "I was just telling Catherine that I came to see how you are both managing. It seems you are managing quite well indeed." Heathcliff crossed to Catherine's side, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder, in a gesture of casual intimacy that spoke volumes about the nature of their relationship. "We are more than managing, Lady Ashford. We are thriving. Your daughter has brought more joy into my life than I knew was possible. I wake each day grateful for the gift of her presence, and I go to sleep each night marveling at my good fortune in winning her hand. She has transformed this house from a mere dwelling into a true home." Catherine felt her cheeks warm at the open declaration, but her heart swelled with love. Even after months of marriage, Heathcliff never hesitated to express his feelings, never allowed her to doubt for a moment how deeply he loved her. It was a stark contrast to Lord Linton's cold practicality, and she was grateful every day that she had possessed the courage to choose love over duty. Lady Ashford's eyes misted with tears she tried to hide. "I see that, Your Grace, and I must say, while the manner of your marriage was certainly unconventional, I cannot deny that you make my daughter happy. That is all a mother truly wants in the end, to see her child fulfilled and cherished." The visit marked a turning point in Catherine's relationship with her family. Her father began corresponding more regularly, his letters gradually warming from stiff formality to genuine interest in the improvements Heathcliff was making at Wuthering Heights. Eventually, both parents came for an extended stay, during which Lord Ashford and Heathcliff discovered a shared passion for progressive farming methods that led to long conversations and the beginning of genuine friendship. The rift caused by the wedding day drama slowly healed, replaced by a new understanding built on mutual respect, rather than blind adherence to social expectations. As autumn painted the moors in shades of gold and amber, Catherine discovered she was with child. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror, but Heathcliff's reaction dispelled all her fears. He had wept openly when she told him, gathering her into his arms with such tender care that she felt cherished beyond measure, as though she were the most precious thing in his world. "A child," he whispered, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "Our child born of the love we fought so hard to claim. Catherine, you have given me everything. A home filled with warmth instead of emptiness, a purpose beyond mere duty, a love that sustains me through every challenge. And now this gift, this miraculous gift. I do not have words adequate to express what this means to me." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Catherine found herself cocooned in her husband's devotion. He was attentive to her every need, adjusting their routines to accommodate her changing body, reading to her on evenings when she felt too tired to do anything but rest, rubbing her feet when they ached, holding her through the occasional waves of anxiety about the approaching birth. The staff at Wuthering Heights rallied around their Duchess, treating her with a warmth and care that made Catherine understand how much they had come to value her presence in their master's life. On a snowy evening in late winter, as wind howled around the sturdy walls of Wuthering Heights in a manner befitting the house's name, their daughter came into the world. She was healthy and strong, with a set of lungs that announced her arrival with impressive volume. Heathcliff held his daughter with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from the baby to Catherine and back again, his expression one of absolute wonder. "She is perfect," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "You are both perfect. Catherine, my love, my heart, you have given me everything I could ever want from this life. I never imagined I could feel this much, that my heart could hold this much love." They named her Margaret after Catherine's grandmother, and she became the center of their world without displacing the love they shared for each other. Catherine watched her fierce, passionate husband transform into a devoted father, marveling at the gentleness with which he handled their tiny daughter, the patience he showed during midnight feedings when he insisted on keeping Catherine company, the songs he would sing to lull Margaret to sleep, old ballads about the moors that his own mother had sung to him. As their daughter grew, so did their family's fortunes. Heathcliffe's treatise on agricultural reform and the moral obligations of landowners was published to great acclaim, sparking discussions throughout England about the relationship between the aristocracy and those who worked their lands. The book's success led to invitations to speak at various societies and institutions, and Heathcliff found himself becoming known not just as a duke, but as a reformer and progressive thinker. His innovative methods caught the attention of landowners throughout England, and soon he was being consulted on estate management across the country. The fees he commanded for his expertise, combined with the increasing productivity of Wuthering Heights under his careful management, began to restore the financial security he had sacrificed to win Catherine's hand. But wealth, when it returned, changed nothing fundamental about their lives. They remained at Wuthering Heights, preferring its wild beauty and the memories embedded in every room to the grandeur they could now afford elsewhere. They continued their evening walks across the moors and Sunday rides to survey the estate, now with Margaret toddling between them or riding on her father's shoulders, her delighted laughter carrying across the wind-swept landscape. Catherine often found herself reflecting on the chain of events that had brought her to this place of contentment. If Heathcliff had not left to resolve his prior engagement, if she had not been forced into a betrothal with Lord Linton, if he had not arrived at the church in time to stop the wedding, where would she be now? The thought of the alternative life she had almost lived, married to a man she did not love, never knowing the depth of passion and partnership she had found with Heathcliff, made her shudder with retroactive dread. On their first anniversary, Heathcliff surprised Catherine with a trip back to the church where they had been married. They stood together in the empty sanctuary, remembering that dramatic day, the chaos and scandal, the moment when everything had hung in the balance and could have gone either way. "Do you regret it?" Heathcliff asked quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "The scandal, the gossip, the difficult months with your family, the financial struggles we have faced. If you could go back, knowing everything that would follow, would you still choose me?" Catherine turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers, her expression fierce with certainty. "I would choose you 1,000 times over, 10,000 times. In every lifetime, in every possible version of events, I would choose you. You are my heart, Heathcliff. You are my home, my partner, my dearest friend and greatest love. Nothing that came before matters, and nothing that may come in the future frightens me, because I know we will face it together. That is what marriage means to me, what our love means. Not the ceremony or the contracts, but the daily choice to stand beside you, to build this life with you, to love you with everything I am." He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that still had the power to make her knees weak even after a year of marriage. "I love you, Catherine. More with each passing day, if such a thing is possible. You are the best decision I ever made, the greatest blessing I could have asked for. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for having faith in us when I had not yet proven myself worthy of it. Thank you for being brave enough to say no to what was expected, and yes to what your heart knew was right. You proved yourself worthy the moment you burst through those church doors," Catherine replied, smiling at the memory that had once been terrifying, but now seemed romantic and perfect. "You could have stayed away, could have decided I was not worth the fight or the sacrifice, but you came for me. You claimed me before God and everyone, and in doing so you gave me the greatest gift imaginable. You gave me a love worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth building a life around." As they left the church hand in hand, stepping out into the bright anniversary sunshine, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain of those weeks when she had thought she had lost him forever had faded to a distant memory, eclipsed by the daily reality of a love that grew stronger and deeper with time. They returned home to Wuthering Heights to find their daughter waiting impatiently with her nursemaid, eager to show her parents the flowers she had picked from the garden, wild blooms that somehow thrived in the harsh moorland climate. As Margaret presented her bouquet with serious ceremony, as Heathcliff lifted his daughter into his arms with a laugh, as they walked together into their home filled with love and laughter, Catherine understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those had their place in bringing them together, but rather the quiet, steady accumulation of moments like these, ordinary and precious, building a life of meaning and joy. The small intimacies of married life, the shared glances across a crowded room, the comfort of falling asleep in familiar arms, the satisfaction of working together toward common goals, the miracle of watching their child grow and thrive. Heathcliff caught her eye over their daughter's head, and the look that passed between them needed no words. It spoke of partnership and passion, of challenges overcome and a future faced together, of a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. Catherine smiled, her heart full to overflowing with contentment and gratitude for the life they had built together. Years passed, bringing with them the joys and challenges that accompany any life fully lived. Margaret grew into a spirited child who possessed her mother's intelligence and her father's passionate nature. She loved the moors as her father did, often accompanying him on his inspections of the estate, learning about the land and its management from an early age. She was eventually joined by a brother, a sturdy boy they named after Catherine's father, in a gesture that completed the reconciliation between the families. The house at Wuthering Heights rang with children's laughter, with the sounds of family dinners and birthday celebrations, with the daily chaos and beauty of a home filled with love. Catherine transformed the austere manor into a warm and welcoming space, adding touches of comfort without diminishing the wild character that made it unique. She established a school for the children of their tenant farmers, ensuring that the next generation would have opportunities for education and advancement. Heathcliff supported her efforts wholeheartedly, teaching occasional classes himself and taking pride in his wife's commitment to improving the lives of those who depended on them. Heathcliff's reputation as an agricultural innovator and social reformer continued to grow. He was eventually called to advise members of Parliament on matters of land reform and the responsibilities of the aristocracy to the working classes. The irony was not lost on Catherine that her husband, who had sacrificed his wealth and position for love, had built a new reputation based on merit and achievement rather than inherited status. He was respected not merely for his title, but for his mind, his innovations, and his genuine commitment to creating a more just society. Their love story became part of local folklore, told and retold with increasing embellishment as the years passed. But those who knew them personally understood that the real miracle was not the dramatic intervention at the church or the scandal that had followed. The real miracle was what came after, the marriage they had built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that deepened with every passing year. They had proven that sometimes the most romantic gesture is not just the grand declaration, but the daily choice to honor, cherish, and support one another through all of life's joys and challenges. On their 10th anniversary, they hosted a grand celebration at Wuthering Heights, inviting family and friends to commemorate a decade of marriage. Catherine's parents were there, now fully reconciled to the match they had once opposed, doting on their grandchildren and exchanging looks with Heathcliff that spoke of respect and genuine affection earned over time. Friends from London mingled with local gentry and tenant farmers in a gathering that would have shocked society's rigid hierarchies years earlier, but that seemed perfectly natural in the world Catherine and Heathcliff had created. As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Catherine and Heathcliff found themselves alone on the terrace overlooking the moonlit moors. The wind sang through the hills as it always did, the sound that had given the house its name, wild and free and somehow comforting in its familiarity. "Do you remember that night?" Catherine asked softly, leaning into her husband's embrace as they gazed out over the landscape they both loved. "When you told me you were not free to act on your feelings, that you needed time to resolve your obligations. Every detail, Heathcliff replied, his arms tightening around her. I remember the jasmine perfuming the air in your father's garden, the moonlight on your face, the desperate need to be honest with you warring with the fear that honesty would drive you away. I remember thinking that loving you was both the best and worst thing that had ever happened to me. Best because you had shown me what real feeling, real connection could be. Worst because I thought I might lose you before I ever truly had you. But you did not lose me, Catherine said, turning in his arms to face him. You came for me. In my darkest moment, when I was about to give up hope, you appeared and claimed me before the world. You fought for us when I had lost the strength to fight for myself. He smiled, that warm, intimate smile reserved only for her, the one that still made her heart skip a beat even after 10 years of marriage. How could I not? You were, you are, everything to me. Catherine, these 10 years have been the happiest of my life. Every morning I wake grateful that you chose me, that you had the courage to defy convention and follow your heart. You saved me from a life of duty without love, from a future where I would have always wondered what might have been. We saved each other, Catherine corrected gently. I would have been just as trapped in a loveless marriage, just as haunted by what might have been. We gave each other the gift of a life lived fully, authentically, with passion and purpose. We chose love over duty, and that choice has made all the difference. They stood together in comfortable silence, absorbing the peace of the moment, the satisfaction of lives well lived and love well tended. The manor house behind them glowed with warm light, windows revealing glimpses of their children settling for the night, of servants tidying up after the celebration, of a home that had become the center of their universe. I have never regretted it, you know, Catherine said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of the wind. Not for a single moment. Not when society gossiped, not when my parents were angry, not during the lean times when we were rebuilding your fortunes. Every challenge we have faced has been worth it, because we faced it together. That is what true partnership means, what real love looks like. Heathcliff cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks in a gesture that had become familiar over the years but never lost its tenderness. Nor have I, my love. I would make the same choices again in a heartbeat. I would sacrifice everything, just as I did, for the privilege of calling you my wife, of building this life with you. You are worth more than all the estates and fortunes in England. You are worth everything. He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the passion of their first embrace and all the depth of a decade of marriage, a kiss that promised continued devotion through whatever years remained to them. When they finally parted, both were smiling, their eyes shining with emotion and the accumulated joy of years spent together. Come, Catherine said, taking his hand. Let us go inside. Our children will want their good-night kisses, and then I want to spend the rest of this anniversary evening showing you exactly how much I still love you, how grateful I am for every day we have together. As they walked hand in hand toward their home, their silhouettes framed against the moonlit moors, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark days of her forced engagement to Lord Linton. This partnership, this love, this family they had created together. Heathcliff had arrived to claim her heart at the moment when all seemed lost, and in doing so had given her a future beyond her wildest imaginings. The scandal that had rocked society on their wedding day had long since faded into legend, becoming instead a romantic story that inspired others. Young ladies dreamed of finding a love so strong that a man would ride through the night to claim them. Young men hoped to inspire such devotion that a woman would defy convention to choose them. But for Catherine and Heathcliff, the story was not a legend or a fantasy. It was simply their truth, the foundation on which they had built a life of meaning, purpose, and enduring love. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, passing portraits of their children and mementos of their years together, Catherine paused to look at her husband. His hair was touched with silver now at the temples. Lines of experience had formed around his eyes, but to her he was as handsome and compelling as he had been on that first night when their eyes had met across a crowded ballroom and changed both their lives forever. "I love you, Heathcliff," she said simply. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Catherine," he replied, pulling her close. "You are my heart, my soul, the reason I breathe. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate duke who had nothing to offer but his love and his determination to build a life worthy of you." "You had everything to offer," Catherine whispered. "Everything that mattered then, everything that still matters now. Your love, your partnership, your unwavering commitment, those are the things that build a life, that create happiness. Not wealth or status or social approval, but the daily choice to love each other, to support each other, to build something beautiful together." They entered their bedroom and closed the door behind them, shutting out the world to exist only in each other. Outside, the wind continued its eternal song across the moors, the sound that was as much a part of Wuthering Heights as the stones of its walls. The manor house settled into peaceful silence, home to a family bound by love stronger than duty, more enduring than scandal, more precious than any fortune. Catherine had been about to take vows to the wrong man, had stood on the precipice of a future without love or passion. But Heathcliff had arrived, dramatic and desperate and devoted, claiming her heart before God and everyone. He had given her the courage to choose love over duty, passion over practicality, happiness over convention. And she had never for a single moment regretted that choice. In the years that followed, their love story became woven into the very fabric of the moorlands surrounding Wuthering Heights. When young couples walked across the heaths, they would point to the house on the hill and tell the story of the Duke who had sacrificed everything for love, who had burst into a church to claim his bride at the last possible moment. Parents used their example when counseling their own children about marriage, reminding them that true happiness came not from advantageous matches, but from genuine connection and mutual devotion. Their children grew up surrounded by the evidence of their parents' devotion, learning by example what a true partnership looked like. Margaret, their eldest, would eventually marry for love herself, refusing several advantageous matches in favor of a man who looked at her the way her father looked at her mother. Their son learned that strength and tenderness were not opposing qualities, that a man could be both powerful and gentle, ambitious and devoted, successful and deeply in love with his wife. Catherine and Heathcliff grew old together gracefully, their love maturing like fine wine, becoming richer and more complex with age. When Catherine's hair turned silver, Heathcliff told her she was more beautiful than ever, and meant it with his whole heart. When Heathcliff's back ached from years of hard work on the estate, Catherine would sit with him by the fire, reading aloud from the poetry they both loved, her voice a balm to his weary body. They remained each other's best friend, closest confidant, and greatest love through all the seasons of their life together. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the terrace at Wuthering Heights, watching the sun set over the moors they had learned to love together, and reflect on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and contentment. They remembered the pain of separation, the despair of forced engagement, the miracle of reunion, and felt grateful for every moment, even the difficult ones, because those moments had shaped them and strengthened their bond. Their story, stripped of scandal and drama, was ultimately simple yet profound. Two people who loved each other enough to fight for that love, to sacrifice for it, to choose it over comfort and convention. They had created a life together that honored both passion and practicality, romance and responsibility. They had shown that love, real love, was not just about grand gestures in moments of crisis, but about the steady, daily commitment to building a life of meaning together. And it had all begun with a duke who refused to lose the woman he loved, who burst through church doors at the last possible moment to claim her heart. It had all begun with a woman brave enough to say no to duty and yes to love, courageous enough to trust her heart, even when the world told her she was making a mistake. It had all begun with two souls recognizing in each other the promise of home, of belonging, of a love worth any sacrifice. This was their story. This was their truth. And it was, from beginning to end, a testament to the transformative power of love chosen freely and cherished daily. The wind continued to sing across the moors, carrying their story through the generations, a reminder that true love, when fought for with courage and commitment, could overcome any obstacle and create a happiness that endured through all the trials life might bring. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 2,000 subscribers, and together, we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, Echoes of Romance.